Hey everyone, happy Wednesday during summer. This week I have another fun video for you. It's actually going to piggyback off of this video right here, where a couple weeks ago I kind of went into the 5 W's of small group literacy and exactly what it looks like, who I'm doing it with, so the who, what, where, when, why, and a little bit of the how of small group literacy in first grade. So I shared exactly what that looks like in my classroom, and that video is going to explain what I do with 90% of my students, really 100% of my students throughout the year, but many asked, and I thought it was going to be good to just kind of make a video to clarify this. They asked what I do with those higher students, the ones who kind of already cracked the code, because most of that video is talking about decoding and encoding, right? So with decoding the decodable texts, we have a first grade scope and sequence that we're going to teach of phonics skills. And what do we do with those students who really already cracked the code? For those students who, they've kind of figured it out on their own, they've learned to apply these different patterns, they've seen them, they use them, we know they can decode, so what do we do next? So in today's video, that's where I'm going to give just some examples and activities of what I do with those students. So if you are ready for this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and make sure you are subscribed to my channel, and let's dive in. Okay, before I dive into the exact activities I am doing with these students, I just want to quickly refer to my small group reading schedule. This is what it looks like right here. And I explained all of this in that previous video that I mentioned, but here you can see when I am seeing and how often I'm seeing my different groups. Just to quickly go over, I am seeing my 2 lowest groups, this red group and this yellow group, every single day, and I'm usually seeing them during my small group literacy time. That will happen at the end of the day, and that is during that time my other students are doing centers of some kind. Now, we also have a win block, which I've talked about many times. I will link my win block video down below in case you want to learn more. But during the win block is often when I am seeing my other 2 groups, my on-level group and then my higher group. And also, just to quickly mention, every year your class might not fall so easily into these categories like red, super below, yellow a little bit below, green on grade level, and blue higher. You might have a class where half of your class is blue. You might have a class where half of your class is red. I'm just using these colors as an indicator as to how often I am seeing these groups. Who am I most concerned about? Even if your class is 50% well below grade level, you still need to choose which of your students you're seeing all the time. So you might have 2 red groups, right? You might have 2 groups that you're seeing all the time, and maybe they're all focusing on the same skills, letter names, letter sounds, CBC, whatever it is. You still want to try to break them up into smaller groups, depending on what skill they're working on, so you can get the most bang for your buck. So I'm just using those colors as an indicator. Just wanted to share that with you. So that being said, the groups I'm really talking about today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my green group, but again, we're going to say that's kind of the on grade level group. So a lot of what I mentioned in the last video is going to apply to this group, but I'm really focusing in on this blue group, the group that I see maybe only twice a week. These are my students that have cracked the code. They're the ones I mentioned earlier who've been exposed to a lot of reading, just it seems to come naturally to them, right? Where they've just picked up those skills, they've learned how to do it. So that's the group I'm gonna really focus in for this video. The green group, we could say I am pretty much doing everything in my last video. If I see them 3 times a week, I'm doing everything in my last video on days 1 and 2. And then I am doing a little bit of what I mentioned here on the 3rd day that I see them, just to kind of give you an indicator of what that kind of looks like. Okay, so now that we know who I'm seeing, what do I do with these students? Also in the last video, I went through the main steps, the 10-step lesson plan that I have and that I do with my students in every small group lesson. So I'm, again, not gonna go over the whole thing because that's in the other video, but I am bringing this up because it is vitally important that even with your students who've already cracked the code, even with your students that are reading, 2nd, 3rd grade level texts, you still need to make sure that there are not any gaps missing in their instruction. Especially as a first grade teacher, you might have students that can read 3rd grade, 4th grade texts, right, that are leveled in that way. They can read multisyllabic words, no problem. They can understand diphthongs and vowel teams. They've learned them, they've applied them, whatever, right? Their parents might be telling you, my student can read at this grade level. That is all great, that is all fine, that is all wonderful. However, especially in first grade with 6 and 7-year-old students, there typically are some gaps that they have. Now, this gap usually doesn't mean that these students need a 2-week full lesson on whatever phonics skill that they may have missed. But typically it does mean in a small group that they're going to need a little bit of instruction there. Especially we find this with encoding. We will have a lot of first grade students that can read words at a much higher grade level, but they can't always encode them or dictate them properly, right? They have the skill, they can read it, they can see it, but then having to remember it, and it's not orthographically mapped yet in their head for them to go ahead and write it down. So this small group time is really the time where we are checking that. I'm bringing this up because even with my highest groups, when they come back to my table, we still do part of this lesson plan for decodable texts. Now, what we will typically do is we skip over 1 through 6 right away, and we are just pulling out starting at 7. Now, step 7 in this lesson plan is current word practice. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm putting up a grid just like this, and it's going to have some words that have the skills that are included in the decodable text you're giving students. And so with my small group, just like I did with my other students, I am just quickly going over and pointing to the word, and I'm saying word, then they read it. Word, read it. Word, read it. And again, the words that are going to be in this grid match the skills and the words that they're going to see in the decodable text. So right away, this is going to let me see back at my small group table, oh, my students can read these words fluently. Unlike my other students who may take a long time kind of blending those words, and we've already worked on the sounds, we've scaffolded it so much, this is just like a quick reading here. I didn't even preview these words with my students. Let's see if they know them. And then if they read them fluently, I go ahead and give students the decodable text right away, and they start reading. So this shortens that part of our small group instruction by a ton, right? We're not doing all that scaffolding work for them, and I can very quickly see in my small group of 4 to 5 to 6 students which words or patterns might they be getting stuck on. And if they are getting stuck on it, let's say 4 out of 5 of my students read all the words fluently, but one of them was getting stuck with ending blends, just for example at the beginning of the year, although this is a high flyer, it'd be something else. But let's say it was the diphthong OI and OY, oi. Let's say they were getting stuck on that. I would give my other students the book, and I would just do a quick lesson with them. I'm explicitly teaching them that word. I might be doing some blending routines to have them practice it, and then I go ahead and give them their book to go ahead and read it, and I see how they do. Again, they're not going to need this 2-week, 3-week long unit, most likely. If they do, that's fine. It will come up in our whole group instruction. But instead, I'm filling in that gap for them so they can quickly catch up and continue their progression. So this small group is still going to get that grid of words that I'm going over them right away when they come back to the table, and then they go right into decoding their text. Now, I did mention earlier that encoding is typically where these high flyers might have more gaps in their instruction. So we still do steps 9 and 10 with them, which is going to be their phoneme segmentation. I want to see if they can separate those phonemes when I say them aloud, and then they're using that knowledge to help them encode the words through dictation. So I am not skipping those steps with my students. Okay, so the main thing I wanted to get across is that even with my highest reading students, I am not skipping that phonics instruction. I am still going through the first grade scope and sequence to make sure they don't have any gaps. Now, in order to do that, it's also important to note that while, of course, we start with CVC words at the beginning of the year in first grade, my lower groups are spending a lot of time doing the 10 steps with me for weeks, right? And we're just picking new CVC books. My on grade level students, they're still doing CVC words. We're doing all 10 steps over a few weeks during that CVC unit, and then we kind of move them up to digraphs. I'm not spending that much time with these highest students on CVC words. I'm probably doing it once. Right away at the beginning of the year, I do pull my highest group back. I give them a CVC book. I, again, am seeing if they can do the word grid. I'm seeing if they can read the book fluently. I am seeing if they can encode those words. 99.9% of the time, they can. It's like a check, perfect, let's move on. It also helps weed out some of those students who I was like, I thought they were reading a little bit higher, but there seems to be a little confusion here, or maybe they're not fluent with their reading. Maybe they can definitely decode those words, but they're not fluent yet. It helps you get to know your students a little bit better. Once I can see that they've done that, I'm moving on to digraphs, moving on to blends. I am following that progression with these higher students, again, just to make sure that they're not missing any gaps. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, if we go at that rate, then, you know, after 6 weeks of small group meeting with them twice a week, we've gone through the whole progression, right? Maybe I've done all 12 of the skills we're going to teach. Well, that's not exactly how it works either, right? While I can quickly move along from CVC words and blends and digraphs probably with these highest students, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just skipping right through and progressing them to, you know, morphology with 3rd grade and 4th grade words. Now, I definitely will do a lot of morphology towards the end of the year, but there are some areas where I can dive a little bit deeper and strengthen students' word knowledge and phonics knowledge. In fact, teaching deeper word structure to my higher students is one of my favorite things to do. It's more of a 2nd and 3rd grade skill that I can bring into my 1st graders and just really help them deepen their knowledge before they kind of progress onto more difficult texts. Now, this is a great time to bring up this book right here. I read it last summer. I feel like it was new last year. Was it new last year or the year before? I don't remember, but I got it as soon as it came out, as I typically do, by Wiley Blevins. It's called Differentiating Phonics Instruction for Maximum Impact. I will, of course, link it down below. But in this book, he talks about differentiating your phonics instruction and what that might look like. And there are specific chapters that go into high impact routines, which are going to be things that you're doing on a daily basis with your students to help them become better readers, things like word building and word chaining, word sorts, dictation. A lot of this stuff I'm already doing in my small group, but he talks about how you can differentiate that same activity with higher students and with lower students, and then he gives examples for on grade level as well. So again, this 10-step process right here is what I'm doing with my on grade level students, and then I'm slowing it down and breaking it up even further for my below grade level students. But I'm also adding in some trickier things for my higher students. So what that might look like is, for example, if we go back to CVC words, if I know my students immediately right away understand and can read and can write CVC words, I might not just jump to digraphs yet and move them along that scope and sequence. I might start introducing 2-syllable CVC words. If my students can spell sun, they can spell suntan. If they can spell cat, they can spell catnip. They can spell catfish. This is a great time with these higher students to introduce the syllable types, introduce how, if we have multisyllabic words, we can pound them out, how we could break them up, and talk about that word structure. And I can do something like that with every single skill that we teach in 1st grade. When we get to digraphs and blends, I can introduce multisyllabic words with those skills to not only have my students read, but also for them to go ahead and write. It's just gonna help them, again, develop those skills in a deeper way. Now, let me just share a couple of my favorite activities that I do with my higher level students to kind of deepen that phonics knowledge. First and foremost, we're really gonna focus on fluency with these higher level students. Again, if I know that they can decode the words, I'm not really moving them up unless I know that they can do it fluently. And we are talking about decoding these words fluently in isolation, in phrases, and in sentences in authentic texts. So one of my favorite ways to do that, and one of the things that I teach these higher level students earlier than the rest of my students, are to use blending lines. Here's an example of a blending line. This one is focused on R blends. I have made a ton of these over the years. And again, it's something that I introduce with my higher students a lot earlier than I do with the rest of my class. And what I love about these blending lines is they are already differentiated just by the nature of them, right? So lines 1, 2, and 3, I'm having students read words in isolation, but each time they're reading it, they are switching up a sound. So as you can see in line 1, they are really focusing on switching up that first sound. Grab, drab, crab, trip, grip, brick, trick. When we get to line 2, they are focusing on switching up the last sound, grass, grab, brat, brass, brick, brim. And then when we get to line 3, we are focusing on switching out that medial sound, crib, crab, track, truck, trick, frog, brag. Already by reading lines 1, 2, and 3, you are going to see how fluent your students are with reading words with R blends. You will see if they have trouble when it mixes to that medial sound, when that starts switching up. You'll see what words might cause them some pause before they go ahead and read it. Once they finish with lines 1, 2, and 3, the next 2 lines are just focusing on phrases. So here they are reading words with R blends in them, but they are reading them in a phrase, usually one that doesn't make too much sense. We're just seeing how they read it. It is drab, the red crab, in the truck, a small crib, what a brat, on the grass. And then last but not least, they go to complete sentences. A red crab is in the grass. Fran put a frog in the crib. And again, here you're giving your higher level students this because you know they can decode the words already. Now you want to hear how fluent they are with it. So blending lines is just a great way for your students to kind of develop that fluency and for you to see if there are any gaps. Now, I made a whole reel sometime last spring, I think. It looks like this right here, about what is in our fluency folders in the classroom. And this is where blending lines and decodable text are what I keep in students' fluency folders. So what I love about fluency folders is they're completely differentiated per student. Every student has only things that they are working on or things that they can read to practice their fluency. So blending lines are certainly things that I include in there right away for them. All right, another fun activity I definitely do in small group with my higher level students are going to be word chains. Now, I use word chains with all my students, but my higher level students are really where I can challenge them, and those word chains are going to be just a little bit more difficult. Typically with a word ladder or a word chain, you only want to change one phoneme at a time as your students progress through the word chain. And if I'm thinking about like my lower level students, I'm really trying to stick to maybe that initial phoneme I'm changing for a while. So we might say mop, change mop to top, change top to cop, just so they're used to doing that. With my higher students, I am switching just one phoneme usually, but I will maybe add a phoneme in. I'll switch the initial first and then switch the last and then go to the medial. I'm switching it all around, and I'm always having students identify which sound I just changed. So we're diving a little bit deeper into that word structure when we're doing this. And then also, again, I make them a little bit more difficult. Here's an example of a word chain I might do with my higher students right here. Now, this is something I would do at the beginning of the year, so I might start by having them spell the word stop. We might tap it first, stop. But realistically, most of my students will not need to do that, and they will just write stop. Now I'm asking them to change stop into stomp, stomp. You can hear that we are adding that M into that final blend there, which is a much trickier skill for students. So then they will write stomp underneath it, or build it with a magnet, however they're doing this. And then change stomp to stamp. Here they're recognizing that they're changing that medial phoneme, that O to that kind of whiny A sound. And then I might ask them to change stamp to stand. Now with stand, we can see that we are actually changing the complete blend at the end of the sound. We're taking away the MP and we're changing it to an ND, stand. So with those, I am typically just saying it aloud, and students are either writing it on a whiteboard, we're circling the sound that we're changing for each one, or they're using magnets to build it. It's totally up to you. I did also create these word ladders right here, and these are super fun to do with my higher level students because let me show you. Here they're just gonna have the picture, so students need to look at the picture first. I, of course, am doing this mostly with them in small groups, so I am there if they need help with what the picture is. And they will start with number 1, yard. They will write it down. This is for R controlled, so we're getting a little trickier here. And they spell yard, and then they change it to card. Then they change card to car. They're taking off the D. Changing car to jar. Changing jar to arm. So here they're taking off the initial phoneme and adding a phoneme at the end. They're adding a letter at the end. And then they are changing arm to farm. So they're going back to adding a phoneme, adding a sound there. So within that 6-word ladder, they're doing a lot of phoneme substitution, phoneme deletion, phoneme addition, and then of course adding those letters to make it phonics, right? So we can do this aloud with students. We can also do this with the letters. And here I'm really looking for my students to be able to spell it. Now that alone and within itself is going to be tricky, and then we make it even trickier by adding some vocabulary to it. So here's the same exact word ladder, and this is something I train my students to do towards the end of the year, but here it is in riddle format. So I tell students that these are going to be R-controlled vowels, right? So we're gonna focus on R-controlled vowels. And number 1 is area in the front or back of some houses. And when I'm doing this in small group with my students, I like them to be able to talk to one another, kind of figure it out, and they might say, oh, yard, and we'll say, oh, yard. I'll write it down. We'll circle the AR. Yes, it works. It's an R-controlled vowel. Let's see the next one. We write one of these when we give a gift to somebody. Okay, we have yard. We can change that to card. Next, a vehicle to drive, car. A cylinder container usually made of glass, jar. Our body part with our hand on it, arm. And a place where animals like cows and sheep live, farm. So again, it's going to be that same ladder, but it's in a riddle format, making it much more difficult and adding a little bit of vocabulary in there as well. So just a fun little extension that I like to do with my students. All right, and last but not least, one other activity that I love to do with my highest groups when we're talking about phonics knowledge is to also include some syntax knowledge and do sentence scrambles. Now, I love using sentence scrambles because we can practice so many phonics skills with one sentence scramble. First, we can show the sentence and I can ask my students to read it. I can hear if they can fluently read that word, so decoding and fluency, boom, right away. And again, we're doing this with whatever phonics skill we are focusing on. And then I can go ahead and cut up the sentence, scramble it around, and see how they use their syntax knowledge to go ahead and put that sentence back together. Take it a step further. After they go ahead and put the sentence back together, can they draw a picture of what it says? Do they understand what it means? So again, with one simple sentence scramble, you can really focus on so many skills and deepen your students' phonics knowledge. Now, just like with word chains or word ladders and blending lines, I am doing sentence scrambles with my entire class as well. I'm probably just not doing them as early on in the year and as often as I am with my higher students. Again, it's a way to differentiate and to kind of build up that knowledge with them without just diving towards harder books, right? Instead, I can deepen their depth of knowledge instead of just progressing them up the phonics scale as fast as I can. And I really find that that helps them as they go forward anyway. Now, you can find a ton of different decodable sentences if you just look online. I actually have in my SJT Literacy Club, I have a teacher word list right here and a teacher sentence list for dictation for all different skills that we teach in K through 2. I find this to be super, super helpful. And just I have this on hand with me when I am at my small groups in case I need to extend students' learning, or if I'm like, oh, okay, I just need a bunch of words real quick to focus on OI and OY. So I'll simply pull this out of my folder and I will give them some words to dictate. And then they also have sentences that they can go ahead and dictate as well, which makes my life a whole lot easier. So if you are in the SJT Literacy Club, I just want to remind you of those two resources that might be very beneficial for you. That way you're not having to get out your phone or search something up like words with OI in them. I have a whole list ready for you to go. Okay, so I hope the first half of that video really emphasized that I am still teaching my highest students a lot of phonics knowledge, right? I still want to deepen their understanding, and this book right here I mentioned earlier, I will definitely link down below. I will link any kind of resource or activity that I mentioned earlier that I use down below. But if I am seeing my students twice a week, these highest students, I am doing some sort of activity like that, maybe a couple of them, in that first small group. So I really just wanted to emphasize that just because my students are higher readers, faster readers, they're reading, higher grade level texts, I am not just skipping over that phonics knowledge. Again, just to reiterate, it is so important that you make sure your students don't have any gaps in their learning, specifically with that encoding portion. And secondly, that word structure and phonics knowledge is going to benefit them so much as they continue to grow year to year that you don't need to push them unnecessarily. So all that being said, on the second day of the week, I definitely am getting my students into grade level authentic texts. So what does that mean and what does that look like? Now, an authentic text is just like what it sounds. It is authentic. It's not controlled. It is not a decodable text. We spend so much time in decodable text in first grade, as we should, making sure our students are understanding those phonics skills. But again, these are students that have already cracked the code. We know they can decode that. We know they understand it. So now let's read more authentic texts. That could also look like those old leveled texts. When the science of reading became super, super popular in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of like, oh, I need to throw out my leveled library. I need to get rid of all of this. The only text students should see are going to be decodable ones. That is simply not the case. That was never the case. It was just kind of a bad myth that kind of got out there. And right now in this video, this is exactly these students, it's exactly who should be reading those leveled texts. Now, when they are leveled, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pick like, oh, they're level J, they're this. But the leveled texts just they're more authentic, right? They are not, again, controlled by phonics patterns. So they typically have a stronger storyline, stronger character development, stronger vocabulary. So these are the texts because you're going to want a set of them. So you do need, sets to go with for your group of students if you have like 4 or 5 of them. So if you still have access to your leveled libraries, this is a great time to pull those books and teach them to your students. I shouldn't have said teach them to your students, but I should say use them with your students. Now, the way you use them might look a little bit different than what you did, 10 or so years ago if you were doing like typical guided reading. I don't know exactly how you taught them, for example, but instead of focusing on phonics skills with these texts, because there aren't any, right? There's not like a clear pattern of, oh, this story is going to have plenty of words with digraphs, so let's focus on that. Instead, you're going to want to focus on the authentic part of the texts. You might want to front load them with some vocabulary that they're going to see. You're going to want to talk about and give them the background knowledge that they need to be able to read that text. Then you're going to give students the text. As they read it, you're going to listen closely as they read. You might notice some words, you might pick up on some words with different phonics patterns that students don't know. Make note of that, and that's going to help you in your other group, meaning like the first time you see them when we're really focusing on those phonics skills. So that's a great way to kind of use this text in that way. And of course, you're really going to focus on comprehension. Are students able to answer simple questions about the text? Are they able to answer more inferential questions about the text? Can they write in response to the text? All of these are going to be great things that you are practicing with students on a weekly basis. Now, just a couple quick things I love to do with my students when we are using these authentic texts. And like I said, first and foremost, I'm going to introduce what the text is. We will take a look at it. Maybe we'll make a prediction. We will go over vocabulary and background knowledge first. Then I will have my students read it. After students read it, I am again asking them questions, and I really like to have my higher level students respond in writing in some sort of way. Now, this typically happens around halfway through the year, where I want this higher group to really practice that response to reading. By instead of me just asking them the question and then we talk about it, I might ask them the question, we talk about it for a brief second just to make sure I hear understanding, and then they have a journal where they go ahead and write their responses. This is going to help them synthesize that information. It helps me kind of check in to see how well they understand it. And also by sending them off to go do that, it gives me an opportunity to meet with somebody else during that time, meet with another group during that time, before I check in with this group again. So not only do we do a lot of writing in response to our reading, but another little tip I have, if you have access to Raz Kids, which is, very popular reading A to Z, there are so many texts on there. What I like my students to do is once we get about halfway throughout the year, I will make like a little book club, and really the book club, all they're doing is everything I just said. They're gonna go over vocabulary, they're gonna go read their books together, they might write in response to it, we talk about it. But this way I give them a lot of student choice. So I might pick 4 or 5 books from Raz Kids. I might like filter it by first grade, second grade, pick some books that I find interesting, or I think that they'll be interested in. And then each time I will have a different student in the group get to pick the book. So this way they've gotten to entirely choose the topic that they're gonna read about. I can maybe filter it by fiction, by nonfiction, anything I want, and I'll again pick 3 or 4 options, and one of the students in the group gets to actually pick the text. Now, this video is not sponsored at all by Reading A to Z. Again, it's been around for a bajillion years, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but you can just see how many books they have here. Another thing I like to do is really kind of overlap my science and social studies topics that we go over. Especially with this higher group, it's a great time to have them kind of dive deeper on a topic that we're already learning about, so they can choose a book in that area. Also, what I love about the Reading A to Z books is they typically already have for the teacher the vocabulary words. They have quite a few different options for comprehension or responses after, whether it's like a little quiz or they have to go write sentences about some of the vocabulary. They have to do a retelling page. It already has a skill ready-made for you, so I love that. I like to make my life as easy as possible. So yeah, that is what I like to do with my students when we are focusing on authentic texts. And again, try not to make it hard on yourself. You know that students need to focus on retelling. If it's a nonfiction text, you know that you want them to identify the main idea and some details that go along with it. Find a graphic organizer or just have them have a journal, and they can just draw 3 big boxes. Tell me the beginning, tell me the middle, tell me the end, tell me the story arc, tell me how the character changed. All the things you're teaching during your whole group lessons anyway, this is a good time to kind of further that with your students. All right, so there you have a bunch of my favorite things that I like to do with my high flyers, right? With my students who've already cracked the code during my small group literacy time. I hope that gave you kind of a quick look of what it might look like with these higher students and how it might differ a little bit from the other video where I really share what I'm doing with my lower students and my on grade level students. Now remember at the beginning of this video, I did share that sometimes with my on grade level students, I am doing some of this, especially towards the end of the year as they progress. I will definitely get them into more authentic texts around springtime. If we've already been able to go through most of the scope and sequence and they're caught up and everything, then I'm definitely also getting them into some authentic text that they can read by the end of the year, which is great. I really hope this answered some questions, but if you have any more questions, please let me know down in the comments below. Like I said, I'll try to link everything that I mentioned in this video. And you don't have to use any of the stuff I mentioned in this video. I'm just giving you ideas to use on your own with those higher students. So as always, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so I know. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of every new video. See you in the next one. Bye.